Hi folks, welcome back to Sprigs and Sprouts and welcome to my kitchen. Today is a good day to be inside. If you can see out my window there, you can see some of the white stuff. We've had snow, so I'm happy to be in my kitchen today. Last time we were in the kitchen, you'll notice some changes. We bought this house, as I've mentioned, about a year ago, and it's in need of some pretty major renovations, and one of them will be the kitchen. But until we get to that, I just freshened it up a little bit by painting the cupboards and removing all the wallpaper and painting the walls. So it looks a little bit different in here. But for me, it makes it more inviting to spend time in the kitchen. So I'm happy that I was able to get some of that done. But today, what I wanted to share with you, and I feel very strongly about this. I know there's lots of recipes, lots of videos out there, and bread is always good, but I really feel like this bread recipe is the only one you'll ever need. It is, no pun intended, by the way. It's super easy. And in fact, what we're going to do today is we're going to time how long it takes for me to actually make this bread. So that's what we're going to do together, because I want to prove to you that this is easier than buying bread. It's also, some people, I used to have a bread maker years ago when we first got married. I've always made my own bread, but I had a bread maker because I thought that's an easier way to do it. And you know, they're big, they're heavy, they take up a lot of room. And it took me more time to make bread in the bread maker than it does doing it this way because of lugging out the equipment. So this is super easy, and I'm going to show you how to make the bread, and we're also going to discuss some common questions or concerns regarding this whole process. So I'm going to address all of those as well. And if you have more questions or comments, certainly feel free. I'll get back to you in the comment section. Okay, so first off, I've got my iPad here because I'm going to use it to time myself. But the only ingredients you need is flour, instant yeast, and salt. Now there's a difference between the yeasts. Instant yeast I prefer because you don't have to proof it. You don't have to put it in water and wait till it to bubble, because I just found that took time and then it made me not want to make the bread. So instant yeast is what I use, and I highly recommend it. So yeast, salt, flour, and water. And I am going to start the timing process right now. Okay, so first you're going to want to get 3 cups of flour. So I'm just using white all-purpose flour. You can buy bread flour. You can buy whatever flour you prefer. And you want to use, now some call for a tablespoon of salt, but I use or a teaspoon rather. I use a half a teaspoon. This is a quarter teaspoon, so 2 of those. Half a teaspoon of salt. You want salt because salt flavors the bread. Without it, it won't have flavor. It'll still rise, but it won't have flavor. And a quarter teaspoon of yeast. And then all you have to do is stir that up. And then I'm going to get some water. You want to get, what I find is the perfect amount for me is, here's 1 cup, 1 and a half cups. And I usually add a little bit more than half a cup, like about 2 tablespoons more. You can use your hands if you want to, but I am just using a spoon. And you just incorporate that really well. And there, stop. So we're at 1 minute and 26 seconds. So that is how you make the dough. And I'm just going to show you here the consistency of the dough. And then what you want to do is you just put a lid on it and you leave it. So with this recipe, sorry, I keep banging that pot. With this recipe, you can now let the dough rest for 24 hours. If you let it rest 24 hours, you'll find that the air in the bread, there's bigger air pockets, and you get a little bit more of a sour taste, like more like a sourdough, I guess. But you can use this after 12 hours. You can even, I mean, I've used it even in a matter of like 6 hours. So the point is you want to let it rest now and let the yeast do its work, because there's only a quarter teaspoon. You're not using a whole lot. So you let it rest now. However, last night, so, I guess around 15 hours ago, I made a dough because I wanted to show you the entire process of making this bread, so you had a good idea of how to do it. So I made this yesterday. Now I could let this go until tonight, and you'll see that it's all bubbly and incorporated. And now we're going to prepare to make this, this bread, to shape it. So what you want to do is you want to heat your oven to 450. And you need a cast iron pot. So this is an enameled cast iron pot, but if you just had a regular cast iron pot, that would work fine. And you want to heat this. I just put this in as my oven's heating because you want to have this piping hot. You want the lid in there as well. The lid and the pot, and you stick that in your oven, and you put the timer on for about 30 minutes. So it's heating, and yeah. Okay, so now we're going to get back to the timing of making this bread, because, and I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer so you can see clearly what I'm doing. Okay, so now I'm going to start my timer again here, and you're going to grab a little bit of flour, just a handful of flour, and put it on your counter or your surface, and then you're just going to take out the dough here. Sometimes the dough, honestly, it's very forgiving. Sometimes it's runnier and sometimes it's thicker. So you want to pull the dough like this and fold it over. And then you want to pull it the other way and fold it over like this. And then you just want to flip it on its side. And then you just let it rest. I've got to stop this again. Okay, so there you have it. Now the dough is ready. I'm just going to let it rest for the amount of time that the bread or the pot is in the oven. There you have it. We're at 2 minutes and 8 seconds for mixing the bread and forming it. So very little time is required. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this dough rest for the 30 minutes that I'm heating up my pot, and then I can put the dough in the pot. But in the meantime, I think what I'm going to do is have a cup of coffee. It's early morning here, and this is often a chore I like to do first thing in the morning. So Fridays are my day for cleaning. Fridays and Mondays really are my days for cleaning and cooking and doing a lot of the household tasks. So I like to do this first thing, and now I'm going to sit and have my coffee. I thought I would just take a few moments to discuss with you why I think this is the only bread recipe that you'll ever need. I used white flour, just all-purpose regular white flour for the recipe or the bread that I'm making, that I'm showing you. However, I've made it many different ways. You can use whatever flour you like to use. So if you want to have more whole grains in your diet, you can use this recipe and adapt it to whole grains. And the way that you do that is you follow the recipe exactly. And when you put, for every cup of whole grain you put in your recipe, you're going to add a tablespoon of gluten. So gluten is a protein that's found naturally in a lot of different grains. And what it does, it provides elasticity and it helps absorb moisture. And so it makes the bread raw, like get big bubbles in the bread, in the dough. And that's why with whole grains, sometimes because it doesn't have enough gluten, they're dense. So if you want it to be a little bit more elastic, you add the gluten flour, 1 tablespoon per whole grain. However, what I do find, unless you like a denser loaf, what I do find is that you'll still want to use at least 1 cup of all-purpose flour to your dough. So if you want to make 2 cups of whole wheat and then 1 cup of white flour, you'll add 2 tablespoons of gluten to make it a little bit more elastic. Typically, I only use 1 cup of whole grain or 1.5. I do half and half, and then I'll add like a tablespoon or a tablespoon and a half, depending on how much whole grain I use. So that helps you be able to incorporate more whole grains into your loaves. The other thing that you can do with this bread is add other ingredients. So raisins, sometimes I do raisin and cinnamon. Sometimes I do date and walnut. Sometimes I do jalapeno and cheddar, or rosemary and cheddar, or sun-dried tomato and rosemary, or olive bread. There's all sorts of different combinations that you can come up with. And when I incorporate those ingredients is just before I form the loaf. So once the bread has risen, then I'll incorporate those ingredients into the dough, and then I'll fold the bread. The other thing that you can use this dough recipe for, which we do at least once every couple weeks, I'd say, is we make pizza. You don't have to change the recipe at all. It's pizza dough. It's so quick and easy that there's no need to make pizza dough and freeze it. It's so easy that you can just make it and use it that day. The other thing you can do with it is cinnamon buns. So you just make the dough just like I did. You roll it out and you can make cinnamon buns. And I'll definitely share a video of how I do that, because it's one of the things I love to make. It's really easy to do. One question that a lot of people have regarding this method of making bread is, I don't have the time. Sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna have pizza for dinner tonight, but I don't have 24 hours or 12 hours to wait for my dough to rise. Valid question. So there's a few tricks that you can do to make it work for you. I've made pizza within 2 hours of making the dough. And the way I do that is you can add more yeast. So this recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. You can add 1/2 teaspoon or even up to 1 teaspoon, depending on how much time you have. So if you only have an hour, add a teaspoon of yeast. And use warm water as opposed to cold water. Not boiling water, but warm to hot water in your dough, because the warmth makes the yeast active. It activates the yeast, and then the process is much quicker. So it's no problem. If you need to make it within a couple hours or even within an hour, it's possible to do that. You can just speed up the process with those tips. So I hope that helps answer some of the questions, because time constraints are a big one, and also using more healthier options in your flour. And I hope that kind of helps you. And you can experiment. It really honestly is no fail. Like, it's never fails for me. Sometimes I add a little bit too much water. It still works. Sometimes I don't incorporate it as well as I should have. So there's some dry bits. You bake it, you don't notice it. So honestly, it's really easy. It's a no fail method for making bread. And I think it's such an important thing to learn how to do, because it's easy, and I feel like you thrive on success. So this bread will help you be successful in the kitchen, and it will empower you to try other things. So the oven is almost ready, and we're just going to be putting the dough into the pot now. One other thing I forgot to mention are buns. You can make buns with this recipe, and also bagels. So I want to do some more videos just showing you how I do those things. And the other thing I didn't mention, when I floured my surface and folded my bread, you don't have to use flour. You can use cornmeal, you can use sesame seeds or poppy seeds. The purpose of that action is to keep the dough from sticking to the counter. And you know, when you buy artesian bread, sometimes they're covered in sesame seeds or poppy seeds or whatever. So that's what you can use in place of the flour or in combination with the flour. Okay, so I'm just going to take this, I'm just going to take the pot out of the oven now and put the dough in. I don't want to burn my wood counter. But keep in mind, when you heat the pot, you want to heat both the pot and the lid. So I just flipped over that dough, so the folded side is up, and I drop it in. And now I'm going to place the lid right on top and place it back in the oven. I'm going to put the timer at 25 minutes. And as I do this, I'm timing myself, putting the bread in the oven, and also with the cleanup. Stop the timer. And now we're going to wait for the bread to cook. So we're going to let it cook in the oven for 25 minutes. And when the timer goes off, we're going to remove the lid from the pot and let it bake for another 5 minutes. Okay, so my timer just went off. It's just going off. And I'm just going to take the lid off and remove the lid. And then hit the timer for 5 more minutes. Okay, this is the moment of truth. Turn off the timer. Is there anything better than smelling fresh baked bread? I'm going to bring you in close to see this. So there you have it. Delicious homemade bread. And let me check now how long this took. So incredibly enough, in under 3 minutes, we made this bread together. So that includes the mixing of the ingredients, the folding of the dough, and cleaning up the counter. So I think that is pretty good, and it's one of the reasons that I always make my homemade bread. So that's it. I think I'm going to end the video here. I hope this video really encourages you and motivates you to try making your own bread at home. This recipe really was a game changer for me. It also, one other thing I should mention, that sometimes people have mentioned they prefer loaf pans. Now you can absolutely use this recipe in a loaf pan if you prefer it for making sandwiches and things like that. So you can do it in a loaf pan, but you would just set it in, instead of heating up the pot and doing all of that process, you would just put it in the loaf pan, let it rise for about an hour, and then bake it. So it's a little bit of a different texture. Like this makes the crust really hard, and soft on the inside, but you can absolutely do it also in a loaf pan. So that's it for this episode of Sprigs and Sprouts. I've got tons more to do today, so I'm going to end it here. So we'll see you next time.